was very sad to see families just paying minimums on their credit cards. They were putting all their money into the mortgage that they had no more money for gas or food.
The thing about coral reefs is that they contain tremendous biological diversity. If you lose the coral, you lose the habitat and you lose those species.
The sad fact is that most public health agencies in this country and around the world spend most of their time and money dealing with diseases and conditions that killed people 100 years ago, but don't concentrate on what's making us sick today.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening from New York. The economy has become issue number one this year. But there's a new twist happening right now that has some economists very worried. There are reports of homeowners walking away from their homes before giving up their credit cards. Those little pieces of plastic are quickly becoming, for many Americans, the last line of defense. This country's simple two-word philosophy in walking toward a recession seems to be charge it. And while that may put a smile on the face of credit card companies, the question out there is, are we simply charging our way deeper into recession?
There are plenty of signs around the country of an economy in trouble, but one of the most recent signs is now developing in the shadow of the housing crisis. We came here to the sprawling suburbs of Northern Virginia just outside the nation's capital. This used to be one of the fastest growing areas in the country. But now, the once red-hot housing market has fallen dramatically. And this area around Washington, D.C. is seeing credit card debt and late payments rising faster than almost anywhere else in the country. The same pattern can be seen across the nation. According to an analysis of the most recent data from the credit bureaus, the states hit hardest by the housing crisis are also seeing the biggest growth in credit card balances. Many of these same states also show the steepest increases in credit card delinquencies.
Bankruptcy is a very emotional thing, okay?
Marta Chonyen is the coordinator of this free monthly debt clinic in Falls Church, Virginia. She tries to help those drowning in debt. For many, the road will end in bankruptcy. But before that last option, the debt counselor suggests a tough cure.
Save your cash, save your money, be smart, cut the cable, cut all unnecessary luxuries, Maybe cut your internet, go to the library and use the internet. To save on electricity, start doing your laundry in the sink, harsh times call for harsh measures. And these are very hard things for Americans to hear because we have a standard of living that's high.
Since Marta started working at the clinic last year, she said the number of debtors has grown from 5 to 50.
One time I was late with Bank of America, the interest rate went up to like 30.24%.
They've all seen their American dream slip away.
It's a horrible reality, but it's a reality that we educate them that they need to face. It's better to give it to them straight than candy coat anything because it's just the beginning. They don't realize this headache is just the beginning.
Many of the stories her clients tell are similar. It started with the buying of a house.
A lot of hardworking, good Americans are losing their homes because there was such a bubble in this area. Houses were appreciating at levels that were unheard of or unseen, and it's all coming to a crash.
The decline in the local real estate market has left many in financial trouble. People who used to borrow against equity in their homes have increasingly turned to credit cards. Many even used them to try and hang on to their homes when their mortgage rates changed by putting a credit card down to make the mortgage payment. One of Marta Chonyen's clients, Juana Cardoza, did exactly that. Juana immigrated from El Salvador nearly 30 years ago, became an American citizen, and set out to capture the American dream. That meant finding a safe community in which to raise her family.
Well, I was looking for the safe place for my family, because I know I live in a city and it's very expensive. So I decided to move all the way to Stafford to buy my house, because this is a very nice, very nice and very quiet area.
Stafford County is about an hour south of Washington, a farming community that quickly grew into a bedroom community. It was here that Juana settled.
When I find a house, it was my dream.
After working as a housekeeper for 14 years, by 2004, Juana Cardoza had saved $70,000. It was enough for the down payment on this 4-bedroom house. She bought at the top of the market, paying over $400,000 for a house that records show sold for $270,000 just 18 months earlier. She put her life savings into it, but she said she didn't realize her mortgage interest rate would jump from just 1% to 7.6% after the teaser rate expired.
I was okay for 1 year paying my mortgage. Before 1 year, my payment went up to $2,200. And then they went up and up.
And that wasn't all. Since Juana Cardoza had a good credit score, she had agreed to sign loans on 3 other houses for family members. One for her sister, one for her daughter, and one for her niece. Now, they were also falling behind on payments. Juana realized she had no choice but to sell her dream house. But it was too late. The market was down, and she owed more than what the house was worth. That's when she started using her credit cards for mortgage payments.
I started using the credit card with my payment was so high. There was no way, I can, make enough money to do the payment. That's when I started using the credit cards.
But it was a temporary fix. As the economy slowed down, 10 of her clients said they could no longer afford to hire a housekeeper. And Juana Cardoza started falling behind on her credit card bills as well. The credit card companies filed suit, and her bank account was frozen.
It was very sad to see families just paying minimums on their credit cards just so that they can get more cash advances out to either pay their mortgages, make the difference, because maybe they were paying just $1,800 and it shot up to $3,500. They got to make the difference somewhere. So they were taking cash advances, or they were putting all their money into the mortgage that they had no more money for gas or food.
So we get up, expenses in the house, like no phone. No heat. That was in November. In December was no heat.
Working with them has shown me a humanistic side to bankruptcy. It's not all about numbers, and it's not all about bad decisions. And I tell Mrs. Cardoza that, life happens. You were just trying to do good, help your family, and we're adults, but we're still learning lessons because life is all about lessons.
Juana now owes more than $120,000 on at least 5 different credit cards. Cards with interest rates that have climbed to over 32%. She is just one of millions of Americans who clung to credit cards to help ride out the housing crash, only to find themselves dragged into deeper financial trouble by rapidly escalating fees and interest rate hikes.
These rules are intended to protect consumers from unfair or deceptive practices.
Now, the Federal Reserve Board is proposing to outlaw some of the credit card industry's most controversial tactics. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke.
Consumers relying on credit cards should be better able to predict how their decisions and actions will affect their costs. At present, this is not always the case. Creditors now can reserve the right to increase interest rates at any time and for any reason, and apply the new rate to purchases that the consumer has already made.
But credit card companies are against new regulations.
It's all a matter of risk.
James Chesson is the chief economist at the American Bankers Association, the lobbying organization for banks and credit card companies. He says the current credit card system is fair.
Today, the best creditworthy people can get a credit card with an interest rate in the high single digits. But if you're riskier and have a payment history where you've missed payments, you have high balances, you would naturally pay a higher interest rate. Higher risk borrowers pay more in interest, just like high-risk drivers who've had accidents pay a lot more for their auto insurance. It's a simple principle of risk-based pricing.
Chesson says that even if Americans start running up a lot of credit card debt they can't pay back, the credit card companies have plenty of money to keep themselves solvent.
All banks, including credit card companies, put aside reserves to cover potential losses. And in spite of all the reserving that they've done to be careful, the industry as a whole has a huge amount of capital. The banking industry today has $1.4 trillion in capital to support the kind of lending that they do, and they have put aside a lot of reserves to be able to cover the losses that they expect.
These reserves not only come from bank customers, but also from investors.
About half of the funding now is coming from the sale of securities that are backed by the revenue that flows in from credit cards.
That's called securitization, and it means that your credit card debt is being bought and sold on the world financial markets. Banks bundle debts from credit cards and mortgages and resell them as bonds, and it's become big business.
There are about $9 trillion of consumer loan securitizations outstanding.
Joseph Mason is a finance professor who specializes in securitization.
Securitization provides about 2/3 of bank funds today. It's the new way that banks raise money in order to make loans. And without calm, stable markets for bank funding, banks can't make loans, and you can't get loans, and you can't buy the things that you can afford.
That's what happened last summer. The securitization market for subprime mortgages collapsed entirely. Critics call securitization a shadow banking system which operates beyond the jurisdiction of bank regulators.
The regulators have been behind the ball throughout really the history of securitization.
Why shouldn't I be really concerned about this? Or should I be?
You should be really concerned.
Now, you've been studying these things for a long time. You gave a warning signal about the mortgage business. What do you think? Is that a reasonable fear that the credit card house will come tumbling down as the subprime did, or unreasonable?
I think it's less than reasonable right now. I wouldn't say completely unreasonable. As I said, economics is a science, but every science speaks with a margin of error. And so I do hedge that to some extent. But nonetheless, the credit card structures are something that have been built with a great deal of experience.
Because they know more about their customers.
Precisely. Precisely. The credit card industry goes to great lengths to know their customers. They track credit card usage so that if you use your credit card to pay a divorce attorney and then start going to a lot of bars afterward, they might know that you could be at risk coming up of a very stressful financial situation.
How do they know these things about me or about anybody who has a credit card?
Well, on your bill is listed the charges that you've made with that card.
But when it comes to predicting customer behavior, you can't say you really know. You say, well, you take historical models, but you know, if I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, what happened with the subprime thing is that it got much worse, a whole lot worse than anybody thought it could do.
Well, economics is a science, but there are limits to any scientific knowledge, even in the physical sciences. And financial engineering will never be perfect, but I think very conservative financial engineering can build financial structures that will stand. Will they always stand? No. But will they fall apart as really predictably as those in the mortgage industry? I think they'll do far better than that.
While Professor Mason says he thinks the credit card market will, in the end, hold up, not everybody agrees. That part of the story when we return. Credit cards have been an extremely profitable business for banks for more than 20 years now. The credit card companies and some other observers say they are confident that the industry is robust enough to handle big losses. But there are other views. Dr. Gary Schilling is a former chief economist at Merrill Lynch, who now runs his own consulting firm and writes an influential newsletter. He has predicted many of the shifts in our economy since the 1970s. He worries now that the securitization of credit card loans may lead to problems like those with subprime mortgages.
Most people know, at least in a broad general way, about what happened to subprime mortgages. Question, is a version of what happened to mortgages, particularly subprime mortgages, happening to the credit card business or about to happen?
Yeah, it could, because these credit cards borrowing are securitized very much as subprime loans were. In other words, they're put into a package, and then pieces of that, tranches they're called, are sold off to investors, and they are the basis of further derivatives, they're called. In other words, they're wrapped around in other various pieces, and you end up with not anybody knowing exactly what you have.
Well, looking at a number of statements from the banking industry as a whole, and basically the industry says, listen, we're very well prepared for increased delinquencies on credit card debt, and neither Dan Rather nor anybody else should compare it in any way with the subprime. What do you think of that?
They have the same problem that a lot of the subprime issuers had of the securitizations and so on. They base this on models, and the models assume that the history of the last couple of decades is going to repeat. In the case of subprime mortgages, there was nothing in those models that said you could have a substantial, long-lasting decline in house prices. And in the case of the credit card issuers, there's nothing in their models that said you could have a situation where people's equity in their houses disappears, and you get not only a serious recession, but one where house prices are very seriously declining. So my feeling is, and I'm not intimate to the models of a lot of these credit card issuers, but I'd be willing to bet that their models are really useless at this point, that the delinquency increases are big surprises to them.
Well, people I've talked to in the banking industries say, listen, it's true, we work on models, historical models, but we build in a cushion. And even if the delinquencies go to hell in the proverbial hack, we'll be okay because the profit in the credit card business is so great. Yeah. We'll be okay and you'll be okay.
Sure, they may have built in quite a cushion between very nice profits and zero profits, much less losses. But if they get these higher delinquencies, they do eat into that profit margin at a minimum, and I think shareholders are well aware of this. And there's another thing too on this, and that is that this decline in saving rate, which is the flip side of increasing borrowing, now that is going to be very, very difficult long run for the credit card business, because the credit card business for the last 25 years, when consumer saving rates have been declining and borrowing rates, this is the flip side, have been increasing, they've been the beneficiaries. It's been a growth industry. If we're right, we're not only going to see these problems now, but for many years to come, we're going to see this as not a growth industry, but a lagging industry. Now, how far it goes, your guess is as good as mine.
Well, we know my guess is not as good as yours. What is your guess?
My guess is that we are in a major recession now, that it is global, that because of the collapse in housing prices, that people have really run out of things against which to borrow, that they've maxed out their credit cards. They are finding that this is not a bottomless pit, it's not a well that never runs dry, that they are being forced to cut back their spending, and that means they're going to be increasing their saving. And one of the reasons that it's going to be very difficult is because, unlike the mortgage area, you don't have the government standing behind there. You have nothing like the American dream of home ownership, which is deeply ingrained in the American psyche, and it's politically very powerful. You look at Congress and the administration, they're stumbling all over each other to figure out ways to bail out about housing. There's nothing like that in the credit card area. Sure, if you had a bunch of banks who are very heavy credit card issuers all be facing financial ruin, the government would have to, the Fed, the Treasury, they'd have to step in. I don't think you have that extent. Credit cards aren't that big in their whole balance sheets. And the reason that I think is particularly serious, as we were just discussing, is because you don't have the government safety net under it. In other words, the problems don't have to be as severe as in the mortgage area for the consequences to be as uninviting.
Let's talk about, go from the macro to the micro, an actual case.
Right.
And you've seen and reviewed what we had with Juana Cardoza, that she put her life savings into a home in an outer suburb of Washington, D.C. at the height of the housing market. She bought at the top. Then her mortgage was reset. So she racked up more than $100,000 debt trying to make the house payments. So in the end, Juana Cardoza may lose the house, may have to go into bankruptcy. Question of accountability. Is she accountable for that? Is she accountable for all of it? Is she the only one to blame?
That's a very good philosophical question. Are we responsible for ourselves, in this case financially? Now, if she is responsible, hey, it's really tough. She could have some very difficult times. She could end up going to charities for just put food on the table. You can sketch all kinds of horror stories. On the other hand, if you say, well, she didn't really know what she was getting into, and maybe there was some fraud. Maybe somebody did get her to sign something that she didn't understand.
Or she ran into predators who stayed on the, maybe barely, on the right side of the law,
Right.
but they were predators.
But let's move beyond that, because if that's the case, those people obviously are culpable. They should be prosecuted, etc. Now, there are a lot of countries that simply would not allow people to get as deeply in debt as Americans typically do, because they culturally feel that just isn't right, and they've got rules and regulations, and the lenders are not allowed to do it. We're pretty free in this country. We're kind of saying, hey, if you want to take big risk and you want to make a damn fool out of yourself, that's your privilege.
Well, among the more difficult questions to answer always are the what if questions. But right. What if there are millions, many millions, or turn out to be many millions of the Juana Cardozas? What does that mean for the credit card industry, and perhaps more importantly, what does it mean for the economy as a whole?
We are the biggest consuming economy in the world, and that is supported in large part by borrowing. That's this whole idea that people have been increasing their spending much more rapidly than their incomes have gained for 25 years. So if you do anything that ends that, and I think that's exactly what we're doing, starting with home equity and now in credit cards, that has some very significant impacts for the economy. We figure that could take 1 percentage point growth off the economy. Now, the economy, adjusted for inflation, long-term grows about 3%.
So if you take 1% off of it, that's a lot.
That is a lot. That is a tremendous amount, and that gives you all kinds of ramifications, because that says you've got a lot of excess capacity. So you're not going to get the capital spending. You don't need more to build more capacity. It says that the consumers are going to be obviously in trouble, because they're going to be trying to save, and you'll have more unemployment under those circumstances, so they won't have the jobs and the incomes and the ability to save, it's a very dire kind of situation.
What's the most important thing for people to know about where we are with the American economy, where we are with this credit card situation building, the home mortgage situation already having hit?
People should understand that we're really in a perfect storm in terms of this whole consumer financing area, whether it's houses, credit cards, student loans, people rating 401ks. Perfect storm in the sense that the lenders are tightening up because they've been badly hurt, and they're going to get hurt a lot more. And consumers have been obviously ravaged, and in the case of the subprime mortgages, and I think increasingly in credit cards, student loans, other lending. And they ought to understand that this is going to be a rough environment. You see, this recession started with housing, and then it spread to Wall Street, and the third phase, if you will, is the retrenchment of American consumers. And now, what should people do about this? Well, the president may get up and say, gee, everybody ought to go out and spend their tax rebates, you know, over $150 billion going out to people as we speak. The surveys show that they're only going to spend about 20% of that or less, but people are doing by saving the 80%, paying down debt, they're doing exactly what they ought to do in their own best interest. It may not help the economy, but it's sure going to put them in better financial shape to weather the storm.
The respected economist, Dr. Gary Schilling. Up next, the beautiful but threatened undersea world of the coral reefs. You'll see it in just a moment.
Reefs are the beautiful building blocks at the bottom of the sea. Although they make up less than 1% of the Earth's surface, they support 25% of all marine life. Without coral reefs, thousands of species of fish and other sea life would have no home. Tonight we're reporting on a major story that could affect us all because the coral reefs are in danger. Worldwide, nearly 1/5 of all coral reefs have already been destroyed, and more than half of those remaining are now threatened. Off the eastern coast of Florida, scientists are finding answers to what's killing the coral.
What you can't see from the white sand beaches here is what makes life so rich and diverse in the Atlantic's Gulf Stream waters. For 220 miles from Palm Beach through the Florida Keys, coral reefs line the ocean floor off Florida's eastern coast, giving home and cover to hundreds of species.
We're going to be going out here to the Fore Reef at Looe Key and anchoring mid-reef. We'll take water samples there and collect some algae.
Brian LaPointe grew up here, swimming and diving in and around Florida's coral reefs. Now a marine biologist with the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution, LaPointe's love of the ocean has become his life's work.
Shark! Uh-oh. Are we ready? Okay. I think we're ready to go.
In this ocean world, he finds troubling changes in the reefs he has been studying.
We've lost over 95% of elkhorn coral at Looe Key. This was the giant redwood of Looe Key that provided all this habitat for all these species, including things like snappers, groupers, and grunts that are the backbone of the Keys fishery.
LaPointe began collecting data on the reefs in the 1980s, taking samples from dozens of species of these fragile living organisms, from the sponge-like brain coral to sea fan coral. Every one of these structures is made up of tiny living sea creatures known as coral polyps. Their soft cores secrete a fluid that hardens into limestone, and that's what creates these vast reefs, which have been growing inch by inch for millions of years.
The thing about coral reefs is that they contain tremendous biological diversity. Many, many species live in coral reef habitats. If you lose the coral, you lose the habitat and you lose those species.
And that's the key. Scientists worry if the coral dies, so do the oceans. And the problem here is on a grand scale because the coral just offshore from Fort Lauderdale is one of the largest barrier reefs in the world.
20 years ago, these coral reefs looked like this, a palette of bright reds, greens, blues, and yellows. These vivid colors come from microscopic algae that lives inside the coral, when the coral is healthy. But what LaPointe sees today is a dull and fading undersea landscape. A clear sign, he says, that the coral is being suffocated. Algae and seaweeds are overwhelming these coral.
Coral reefs have adapted over millions and millions of years to very low nutrient concentrations, clear water. When nutrients become abundant in the water, you upset this balance. And basically you get weed species like seaweeds that begin to compete with the corals for space on the bottom.
The nutrient LaPointe is finding in the waters is nitrogen. It acts as a fertilizer that can cause massive algae growth that literally chokes the coral.
What we recorded in our monitoring at Looe Key was over a 100% increase in nutrient concentrations from the 1980s to the 1990s. And the water gets dirty. You get algae in the water and other types of organic material that clouds the water, and it blocks the sunlight that corals need to grow.
While scientists believe coral reefs can withstand small fluctuations in nutrients and water temperatures, like any species, coral has a tipping point. And South Florida's rapid population growth means more and more pictures like this. Not far from Miami, some of the best beaches in Florida have underwater sewage outfall pipes, like this one, only about a mile offshore. While bathers play in the surf, millions of tons of partially treated sewage, medical and industrial waste, are dumped here 90 feet down. LaPointe has measured nitrogen levels 1,000 times greater than what healthy coral can tolerate. And even though the flow of sewage into the Atlantic off Florida is completely legal, there is growing evidence it is throwing the delicate ecosystem completely out of balance. Dan Clark runs a small nonprofit group called Cry of the Water.
It's not a very nice place to dive. It's kind of scary, actually. I went diving with those guys there, and when you come up, there's all this dirty water come boiling to the surface, and you can smell it, and it's not a nice place to be, but somebody needs to get out there and document what's going on.
Clark took his evidence to the U.S. Coral Reef Task Force, a group of federal and state agencies created almost a decade ago to preserve and protect coral reef ecosystems. While there's general agreement about the effects of man-made waste, finding a way to reduce the nitrogen content before it reaches the ocean waters comes at a price taxpayers may not be willing to pay. As a policy advisor for the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, Roger Griffiths is on the front lines of the effort to save the coral.
The technology exists to take in sewage and put out the other side drinkable water. There's no question. Those kinds of plants are very expensive. This becomes trade-offs in investment. Communities, local municipalities, states, and the federal government have to make these tough decisions. The reality is reefs thrive in water that is very low in nutrients. You can't put nutrients into a reef area and expect it to survive. We know how to treat water. It's a matter of, it's expensive, and we don't, in many of these areas, we don't currently have the capacity to handle the increased population that has settled there very rapidly, in many cases in the past 5 to 10 years.
The depth, the size of the problem is not in dispute. But not everyone agrees that man is the most dangerous threat, or that every problem seen in the reefs comes from development along the shore.
These are ecosystems in trouble. There's coral bleaching, there's disease.
As a politically appointed Deputy Secretary of the Interior, Lynn Scarlett is one of many federal officials who are supposed to be protecting over 3 million acres of this country's coral reefs.
You know, there's different solutions for different problems. First, with some of the disease that we're seeing, I think first and foremost we need more investment in research and the science. Some of the diseases that we're seeing, we don't quite know why they're occurring. There have been studies by our U.S. Geological Survey on dust that's coming all the way from Africa that they hypothesize is bringing diseases, pathogens that are affecting our coral reef. So first and foremost, let us invest in science.
And some of that science is leading researchers to look beyond the oceans. What they're finding is a threat to the coral miles away, coming from inland sources. Here in Florida, the draining of the Everglades, a natural freshwater filter, is taking a toll, and the toll is increasing rapidly.
Half of the Everglades, the largest wetland area in the U.S., is already gone, lost to developers and agriculture. Larry Brand, a professor of marine biology at the University of Miami, studies the connection between the Everglades watershed and the surrounding ocean environment.
Well, the traditional flow of water in South Florida flows through the Everglades down into Florida Bay, and then from there that water goes mostly down through the Florida Keys and ultimately over the coral reefs.
It can take up to a year for the fresh water from the Everglades to reach the coral reefs. As the water travels through the wetlands, those wetlands act as a natural filtering system, removing excess nitrogen and other nutrients that are deadly when concentrations get too high. When the water was drained, the natural filtration system was compromised.
The Everglades are about 5,000 years old, and while that soil in the Everglades is underwater, it tends to hold in and store nutrients. Once you drain the Everglades and that soil, which was underwater, now becomes dry land, it starts releasing those nutrients. So essentially 5,000 years worth of nutrients, which were stored during the history of the Everglades, have now been released just in the 20th century, over the last 50 to 100 years.
Brand, like Brian LaPointe, believes there's a direct connection between man's behavior on the land and the decline of Florida's coral reefs.
It was only in the 80s that they decided to start pumping that water to the south, and that's when we started seeing the large algal blooms in Florida Bay and then the rapid decline of the coral reefs in the Florida Keys.
There is disagreement about which factors are causing the coral to fade so rapidly, but there is no question that the reef's destruction is a warning sign.
Good dive, Brian?
Great.
Off Looe Key, Brian LaPointe sees other evidence of danger on the reef.
Well, what we saw today was quite an algal bloom on the bottom, cyanobacterial bloom, a plant we call Lingbia that grows on soft corals. It produces some nasty toxic compounds, and we're very concerned about Lingbia. It's becoming a problem alga throughout many of Florida's coastal waters and fresh waters as well, because it produces tumor-promoting compounds. Very concerned that it may be contributing to problems like fibropapilloma in sea turtles, who inadvertently eat it.
So far, no direct link has been confirmed between the algae and lesions and tumors appearing on turtles and dolphins, but commercial divers are starting to see the changes in the sea creatures and on the reef. Rick Trout earns a living diving off the Florida Keys.
Many of the animals, sea turtles in particular these days, but also dolphins and whales, will come in with what is known as the papillomavirus. It looks like a real nasty, ugly wart that actually can grow over the animal's body.
To save the turtles, businessman Richie Moretti founded the Turtle Hospital.
How you doing? You're getting pretty fat. Yes, you are.
Moretti bought a beach hotel in the Keys on a whim and made the saltwater pool an aquarium. He decided to rescue turtles in exchange for the chance to add one to his collection. The turtles took over the pool, and his became a full-time job.
We're seeing what may be a virus. They grow lesions over as much as 75% of their soft tissue, and a lot of times because of the vascular nature of the eyes, the tumors form around the eyes and it cuts off their vision, and then they starve.
Moretti could only treat the symptoms, while researchers keep looking for the cause. And the clues are out there on the reefs, where commercial diver Rick Trout sees many marine species in a race against time.
You go out to some of the reefs that you saw 20 years ago, and it's depressing. It's not what you wanted to see. You'd like to see things get better, but unfortunately we've seen things get worse down here. Compared to the 20, 25 years ago, there are many of us that have gone out to the reefs and seen the colors, the vibrancy of the water, and those colors just get muted away by all of the algae that ends up covering the colors and strangling the actual little coral creatures.
Scientists are desperate to do something as they see the coral die before their eyes. A coral that is needed by a quarter of the creatures of the sea. A coral that is essential to life in the oceans.
This reef was the most beautiful part of Florida when I first saw it in the late 1970s. And it looked vastly different than it looks today. And it really rips my heart out today to come back to see these reefs I knew as a child and see them. It looks like they've been vandalized, or that, you know, burglars came in and stole all the fish and the coral. They're just, you know, a very small fraction of the resources left today.
Since we first broadcast this story, there's been action to protect the coral reefs. The Florida legislature has just passed a bill that mandates that nutrients in the sewage pipes be reduced gradually over the next decade. The pipes are to be closed for good in 2025. For our next story, we'll give you a look at a doctor who's trying to make New York the healthiest city in America. He's Tom Frieden, the health commissioner for New York City. And he may be the boldest, most aggressive health official anywhere. He doesn't just look out for diseases, he's determined to keep people from getting them in the first place.
The sad fact is that most public health agencies in this country and around the world spend most of their time and money dealing with diseases and conditions that killed people 100 years ago, but don't concentrate on what's making us sick today.
Tom Frieden combines the bureaucratic efficiency of a public servant with the moral certainty of a crusader. With the support of his boss, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, he's using the tools of government to promote healthy behaviors and discourage, even outlaw, unhealthy ones. Frieden says America is facing a health crisis, one of our own making.
What's making us sick today?
Tobacco, first and foremost, obesity, diabetes, lack of access to physical activity, low physical activity levels, also a variety of things relating to alcohol.
Frieden says government should encourage people to live healthier lives, but he says sometimes encouragement isn't enough. An epidemiologist by training, Frieden was fighting tuberculosis for the World Health Organization in India when billionaire businessman Mike Bloomberg was elected mayor of New York and began searching for a health commissioner.
I said, my goodness, far and away the leading preventable cause of death in New York City is tobacco. And I know tobacco is really controversial to take on. I don't know anything about this Bloomberg fellow. So I told him, look, I've looked at the data. It's all about tobacco. If he's willing to take on the tobacco industry, which is very controversial and very few politicians are willing to do it, then it's worth us talking.
Bloomberg was willing. He had already donated millions to public health education and was a former smoker himself, who admitted he'd had a hard time breaking the habit. So he welcomed Frieden's activist approach. One of the first steps was getting the tax on a pack of cigarettes raised by $1.50, making New York cigarettes among the most expensive in the nation.
Thank you.
To help people quit, the city ran a series of TV ads that pulled no punches.
I wanted to be a mayor lit on fire, and my dream was coming true. But then I got throat cancer from smoking cigarettes. It almost killed me.
But the most controversial step was a ban on smoking in indoor workplaces, framed in terms of the dangers of secondhand smoke. The law sent smokers scrambling to find somewhere legal to light up. Critics said it was a case of too much government intrusion.
But isn't that, or is it, an individual responsibility to take care of yourself, to go to the doctor, talk about prevention, not something for the government?
When you protect workers from being smoked on with cigarette smoke that's going to cause them cancer, heart disease, asthma, lung infections, that's not interfering with someone's choices. That's protecting one group of people. I think what we really want to do is give a level playing field for individuals to make healthy choices.
Every time you smoke, cigarettes are eating you alive.
Since the anti-tobacco campaign began, New Yorkers have given up cigarettes in record numbers, a 20% drop in the past 4 years alone. Smoking rates among teens have gone down by more than half. And other cities, even entire countries, like France and Ireland, have followed New York's lead. But tobacco was just one of Frieden's targets. He passed out empty water bottles to push New York City tap water instead of sodas loaded with sugar. He's encouraging mothers to breastfeed their newborns. He's subsidizing low-fat milk and making fresh fruits and vegetables available in New York's poorest neighborhoods. He's even launched the city's own branded condoms to encourage safe sex, and gave away 36 million of them last year alone. You can even order them online.
So now we're into New York City customized condoms. Now, this has got to be a Saturday Night Live skit.
Rick Berman is a Washington lobbyist who runs the Center for Consumer Freedom. Many of his clients in the food and restaurant business say New York, under Tom Frieden, is becoming a nanny state.
You don't know where to stop when you start telling people that the personal choices that they make during their lives are irresponsible. Irresponsible is in the eye of the beholder, and we seem to be capturing more and more decisions and putting them in the irresponsible bucket and taking the decision-making away from people.
In December 2006, New York became the nation's first big city to ban restaurants from using trans fats, an artery clogging substance that helps preserve food and improves the quality of baking. The rules affect every restaurant, diner, and donut shop, and many of the foods New Yorkers love to eat.
Just as if there is typhoid in the water or typhoid in the food, it's the responsibility of government to get it out, rather than tell everybody, ask your waiter whether there's any artery clogging artificial substance in the product before you order a food. That's absurd.
Trans fats are not poison. Again, if you put margarine on a bagel, have you made yourself a poisonous bagel? It is so ridiculous. It is so over the top. And that's what these people do. They try to make an issue seem far more significant and far more dangerous, which in turn then justifies their meddling in people's lives.
Inspired by New York's ban against trans fats, other cities, from Boston to Seattle, are doing the same thing.
When we began that, people said impossible, can't do it. Turns out it's not that hard to do. And more than 50 national chains, since we made our move, have eliminated trans fats.
Along with the ban was a measure requiring that chain restaurants put the calorie content of the food they serve in plain view, so customers can see just how fattening their food really is. It's all part of Dr. Frieden's war against a growing tide of obesity and diabetes.
We've looked at obesity, diabetes, because they're the only health problem in this country that's getting worse, and it's getting worse rapidly. And diabetes follows obesity like night follows day.
And to that person who says, I'm against big government, I don't want the government intruding in my life, I don't want the government telling a restaurant what they can do or telling Burger King and McDonald's what they can do.
We really want the government to do the least it has to do to protect the public. But in the same way, you need to make sure that certain core functions of government are done well. One of those core functions is making sure that our food and our water is clean and safe.
In April, Frieden scored another victory when a federal judge upheld the calorie law, overturning a challenge from the restaurant lobby. And chain restaurants across the city began posting their calories in plain view.
The New York Health Department has a long history of tackling contagious diseases, going back to the days when millions of immigrants crowded into the Lower East Side tenements, breeding grounds for sickness. But it's one thing to take on infectious diseases like smallpox or tuberculosis. It's another to take on chronic disease like obesity, diabetes, and clogged arteries. Critics point out that these are lifestyle diseases caused by individual behavior. As they point out, you can't catch a heart attack.
The proper role of public health ought to be the role that it was established for, which was to worry about communicable diseases, cholera, tuberculosis, the list goes on. Today, instead of being worried about diseases that can be communicated to you by someone else or the population at large, Frieden, anyway, has decided that his role is to keep you from making yourself sick or to make yourself less healthy. And so we've moved from a population-wide concern to an individual concern.
Here in the South Bronx, Frieden has launched another controversial program, a pilot project, again, the first of its kind in the country. The South Bronx is the only part of New York City where life expectancy is actually going down, and diabetes is rampant.
It's more than doubled in the past decade. We're seeing a big increase in people having leg amputations, going blind, going onto dialysis, having heart attacks, dying young from diabetes. What can we do?
What Frieden has done is set up a data bank called a registry with information on every person who suffers from diabetes. Every time someone in the South Bronx has their blood sugar tested, the results, along with that patient's private information, their name, age, and address, are automatically sent to the data bank without the patient's consent. The health department then contacts the patient's doctor and suggests ways the doctor can help manage the disease. Patients can voluntarily ask that their doctors not be contacted, but it's bureaucratically not so easy to do.
And in some ways, it's laudable that the commissioner wants to help people with this disease that aren't doing well. But the way of doing it is so incredibly big brother.
Deborah Peel is a psychiatrist and head of Patient Privacy Rights, an advocacy group in Austin, Texas.
Public health has never been so far in the business of surveilling and tracking people with chronic diseases.
Peel spends a lot of time in Washington fighting measures she says undermine medical privacy.
I think privacy is an essential human need. I mean, people are always very uncomfortable when strangers know things about them that they shouldn't. And technology has made possible all kinds of strangers knowing way too much about us.
Dr. Frieden agrees that the health system should protect privacy wherever possible.
But at the same time, if we're paralyzed and we say, we have this information about people who may lose their leg or go blind, and we're just not going to do anything because it's just too risky, that's a problem too.
And to that person who says, but I got to tell you, when it comes to my health, I want it to be between me and my doctor. I don't want City Hall involved in any way of this. You say what?
Well, you pay for medical care, but the government also pays for medical care. And the government has an interest in preventing preventable illness.
Now the question is, who's going to draw the line and where is the line going to be drawn? And the individual in this case may have no right to draw the line, because once you go and seek medical attention for some problem, it may be that the bureaucracy requires that the doctor or the hospital then deposit your information in this registry. I don't think people understand that we may be getting to that point in time, and I don't think that people are going to be happy about it.
The core of our approach here has been to do what's rigorously proven to work to save lives. If it's controversial, that's unfortunate. I'd rather it not be controversial. Our approaches are rigorously based on data. I'm an epidemiologist by training and an infectious disease physician. I want to know that the treatment we propose, that the policy we propose has the best possible chance of working based on rigorous evidence. If it doesn't, we shouldn't be pushing it.
And that's our report for tonight. From New York, for HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.